The alien girl knelt on the cold stone floor. Her wrists were chained, the metal biting into her skin every time she moved. Around her, the crowd laughed and whispered, pointing at her like she was not a person, but a show. Her master, tall and cruel, stood with folded arms. He dropped a dirty piece of bread on the ground near her feet. The bread was half rotten, covered in dust, but still the only food she had seen in 2 days. "Eat," the master ordered, his voice sharp and full of command. His eyes glowed with the cruel pleasure of watching her suffer. The girl lifted her head slowly, her long hair sticking to her face. Her lips were cracked from thirst, her stomach twisted in pain, but her eyes still held fire. She shook her head, refusing to bow, refusing to crawl and eat like a beaten animal. The crowd gasped at her defiance. The master smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who enjoyed breaking the will of his prey. "Then starve," he hissed, and with a swift kick, he smashed the bread deeper into the dirt until it mixed with mud. Her throat tightened. The smell of food made her weak. Her body screamed for it, but her spirit pushed back. She would not give him the joy of seeing her on all fours, eating like a beast. She turned her head aside, pressing her lips together so tightly they bled a little. The master grew angry. He grabbed a whip from his belt, the sharp metal tips at the end glinting in the torchlight. Without warning, he struck. The whip cracked against her back, tearing through her thin clothing. She clenched her jaw but did not scream. Another strike followed, harder this time. The sound of leather hitting skin echoed, and the crowd pulled back slightly, silent now. Still, she refused to move. She refused to touch the food. Every lash cut her skin, but her pride stood taller than her pain. The master leaned closer, his shadow falling over her trembling body. "You will crawl, you will eat, and you will know you are nothing," he whispered in her ear. Her eyes, full of pain, but also burning with fire, looked up at him. "I am not nothing," she whispered back, though her voice was weak. The master's face twisted with rage. He threw the whip aside and pushed her down into the dirt with his boot. He forced her face close to the ground, inches away from the filthy bread. "Eat, or I'll break every bone in your body," he growled. Her stomach cried out in hunger. Her body begged her to take even one bite, but she spat in the dirt instead. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Some laughed nervously, others looked away in shame. None dared to speak against the master. Her defiance only deepened his cruelty. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her across the ground. Her skin scraped against the stone floor, leaving marks of blood. The chain on her wrists rattled with every pull. He stopped at a water trough used for animals, dipped her head in, and forced her face into the dirty water. She fought for air, kicking and twisting, but his grip was too strong. When he finally pulled her up, she coughed and gasped, her chest heaving. The crowd's silence grew heavier. The master threw her back into her corner like trash. "You will learn," he spat, his voice like poison. "Soon, you will beg me for scraps." The girl sat there, her body shaking, water dripping from her face and hair. She pressed her knees to her chest, hiding her tears, but her eyes still glowed with silent rage. She would not break. She would not give him what he wanted. From the shadows, far away from the crowd, a human stood watching. He was new to this city, a stranger among these aliens. He had seen cruelty before, but this was different. The way the girl was treated made his blood boil. His fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to step forward, to shout, to fight, but he knew one wrong move could mean death. Not just for him, but maybe for her too. The human's heart raced. He had to decide. Could he really stay silent and let this happen? Or would he risk everything for someone who might not even trust him? The girl's eyes, still full of fire despite her broken body, caught his from across the space. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded. He saw her strength, her suffering, and something inside him shifted. The master laughed again, tossing another scrap into the dirt. The crowd jeered, but the human's jaw tightened. He knew he could not walk away. The humiliation of the alien girl burned in his chest like a wound, and though he had not moved yet, a dangerous thought formed in his mind. He could save her, but to do so, he would have to step into a world of chains, whips, and alien law, and once he did, there would be no turning back. The night was cold and silent. The torches in the market square had burned low, leaving long shadows on the walls. The crowd had gone home, and only the sound of chains moving from time to time broke the silence. The alien girl lay in her corner, her body aching from the whip marks and her throat still sore from being forced under the dirty water. She tried to keep her eyes closed, but hunger would not let her sleep. Her stomach twisted painfully, reminding her of the scraps she had refused. Her pride had kept her strong during the day, but now in the darkness, weakness pressed down on her. Every breath felt heavy. Every sound around her made her more alert. She was still chained, still caged, and still treated like less than an animal. Yet she refused to let her master win. Even if it meant starving, she would not bend. In the shadows nearby, the human who had watched earlier had not left. He leaned against a wall, hidden by the darkness, his mind torn in conflict. What he had seen that day had left a mark on him. He could not forget her eyes, full of pain but also full of strength. No one else dared to care for her. No one else even tried. But he was human, and something inside him whispered that he could not let this continue. Slowly, carefully, he moved. He pulled out a small piece of food from his pack. Bread, fresh and clean, nothing like the scraps her master had thrown. He also carried a flask of water. His heart pounded as he stepped closer to the cage, making sure no guard was around. The girl stirred when she heard movement, her eyes opening sharply. She saw him in the dim light. At first, she thought it was another guard, maybe her master coming back to torment her. She pulled herself back against the wall, her chained hands rising a little, as if to protect herself. But then, she noticed the bread in his hand. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion clear in them. The human crouched low so his movements would not attract attention. He placed the bread and water just near the bars of her cage. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Eat. You need strength." The girl stared at him without moving. Her pride flared again. She thought it was a trick, maybe another cruel game to see her crawl. Her voice came out hoarse but sharp. "I am not an animal. I will not beg." The human shook his head. "I'm not your master. I don't want to see you beg. I just don't want to see you die." For a long moment, they only looked at each other. The girl's stomach twisted harder. Her body screamed at her to take the food, but her spirit refused. She wanted to believe him, yet years of cruelty had taught her never to trust. She lowered her eyes, torn between hunger and suspicion. Minutes passed, and the human did not move. He did not push the food closer, did not force her. He just waited. Finally, unable to fight her body any longer, the girl crawled forward slowly. Her chains rattled as she stretched her hand out, taking the bread with shaking fingers. She lifted it to her nose, smelling it carefully, making sure it was not poisoned. Then, in small bites, she began to eat. Her throat burned as she swallowed, but the taste of real bread was almost too much to bear. Tears welled in her eyes, though she quickly hid them. She drank the water next, each sip feeling like life itself returning to her body. When she was done, she pressed her back against the wall again, hugging her knees to her chest. The human's eyes softened as he watched her. He had seen soldiers eat with joy, leaders eat with arrogance, but never had he seen someone eat with such desperate need. It made him angry at the cruelty of her master, but it also filled him with quiet respect for her strength. She had survived beatings, humiliation, and starvation, and yet her spirit had not broken. The girl finally looked at him again. Her voice was low, still filled with mistrust. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me? You gain nothing." The human's answer was simple. Because no one should be treated this way. For the first time, her expression shifted. It was not trust yet, but it was no longer pure suspicion either. She turned her face slightly, hiding her emotions, but inside, a tiny spark of something new flickered. Someone cared. Not for power, not for control, but simply because it was right. She closed her eyes again, pretending to rest, but her mind was restless. She did not know this human, did not know his name, his reasons, or his strength, but his actions had placed a crack in the wall of her defenses. She told herself not to trust him, not to hope. And yet, as she lay there, the taste of bread still in her mouth, she could not push away the thought that maybe, just maybe, he was different. The human stepped back into the shadows, watching her until her breathing slowed. He knew he had taken a risk. If the master discovered what he had done, punishment would be swift and brutal. But he also knew something stronger now. This was not the last time he would help her. He could not walk away. The moonlight touched the cage as if marking her as someone special, someone worth saving. And in that quiet night, the bond between the human and the alien girl began to form. Fragile but unbreakable, a bond born in secret, in hunger, and in defiance against cruelty. Neither of them spoke again, but both understood one thing. This was only the beginning. The next day came with bright sunlight, but for the girl it felt like another day of chains and pain. She sat weakly in her corner, her body still carrying the marks of the whip. The human's food from last night had given her strength, but not enough to hide it completely. Her master noticed the difference. Her eyes were not as dull as before, her posture not as broken. She looked like she was holding on, and that alone made him suspicious. He circled her slowly in front of the crowd, his boots echoing against the stone. "Strange," he said, his voice sharp. "You should be weaker. You should be crawling by now, but you sit there like you still have hope. Who gave you hope?" His cold eyes searched her face. She lowered her gaze, hiding the truth, but the master could smell defiance like blood in the air. The crowd gathered again, eager for cruelty, for a show. They whispered to each other, pointing, waiting for the master to break her spirit once more. The master grabbed her by the arm and dragged her into the open. "Perhaps I did not beat you enough," he sneered. He pulled out his whip again, raising it high. The girl clenched her teeth, bracing herself. But before the whip could fall, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Enough!" Gasps filled the air. Heads turned to see the source of the voice. The human stood there, fists tight, his jaw hard. He stepped forward, pushing through the crowd. His heart raced, but he did not stop. He had stayed silent too long. The sight of her suffering again burned away his fear. The master's eyes narrowed, surprised at the interruption. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone amused and dangerous. "A stranger dares to speak in my domain?" The human did not answer his question directly. Instead, he looked at the girl, still held by her master, her face pale but proud. Then he turned back to the master. "She has done nothing to deserve this. She is not an animal. You will stop." The crowd exploded in whispers. No one had ever spoken against the master before. To challenge him was to invite death. Some laughed nervously, others stared in shock, but all knew something dangerous had just begun. The master threw his head back and laughed, a cruel and mocking laugh. "A human? You think you can tell me what to do? You think your words matter here?" He shoved the girl roughly to the ground and stepped toward the human. "Do you know the price for interrupting me?" The human did not step back. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, his eyes locked on the master's. "I know the price," he said, "but I will not stand by while you destroy her." The master's smile turned cold. He signaled to two guards. "Bring him," he ordered. The guard stepped forward, weapons in hand. The human's muscles tensed, his heart hammering, but he stood his ground. The girl's eyes widened as she watched. No one had ever dared for her. No one had ever risked themselves. She wanted to scream for him to stop, to run away before it was too late, but her voice caught in her throat. Chains held her body, but fear held her voice. The guards reached the human, grabbing his arms, but he broke free with sudden strength. Gasps filled the air as he pushed one guard aside, sending him stumbling to the ground. The other swung a blade, but the human ducked, his reflexes sharp. The crowd roared, some in fear, some in awe. The master's face twisted with anger. "You dare fight me?" he shouted. His whip lashed out, striking toward the human. The crack split the air like thunder, but the human caught the whip with his bare hand. Pain ripped through his palm, but he held tight, refusing to let go. The crowd fell silent, stunned. The girl's breath caught. She had never seen such defiance, not from anyone. Her chest ached with something she did not understand, fear for him, and something deeper, something dangerous. The human pulled hard, yanking the whip from the master's hand. He threw it aside, his voice loud and steady. "I will not let you touch her again." For the first time, the master hesitated. His pride had been wounded in front of everyone. The crowd waited, holding their breath. This was no longer a simple punishment. This was a challenge. And in their world, a challenge meant only one thing: blood. The master's eyes burned with fury. He stepped closer, his fists clenched. "Then you will die, human," he snarled. The girl's chains rattled as she crawled slightly forward. Her heart pounded wildly. She wanted to tell him to stop, to escape while he still had a chance. But her voice finally broke free, soft and desperate. "Run, please." The human turned his head just enough to look at her. His eyes softened for a moment, and he shook his head. No, not this time. The crowd erupted into shouts, some cheering for the master, others whispering about the human's courage. The air was thick with tension, every heartbeat stretching the silence between the two men. The master raised his weapon again, stepping into the circle of space between them. The human took his stance, ready to fight. The girl held her breath, her chains cutting into her skin as she gripped them tightly. The moment stretched, and the world seemed to hold still. Then, with a roar, the master lunged forward. The fight had begun, and everyone knew this was no longer about punishment or pride. This was about survival. The girl's heart pounded so hard she thought it would break her chest. For the first time, she felt hope mixed with terror. The human had stepped forward for her, and now everything hung on what would happen next. The master lunged with his weapon, his movements quick and full of rage. The human stepped aside just in time, the blade missing his chest by inches. The crowd screamed, some shouting for the master to kill, others too shocked to speak. Dust rose around them as they moved, every strike and dodge louder in the silence of those watching. The human fought with raw strength and instinct. He had no armor, no fine weapon, but his hands and body were fast, trained from years of survival. When the master swung again, the human blocked with his arm and punched hard into the alien's ribs. The master staggered, shock flashing across his face. No one had ever dared hit him before, much less make him stumble. The girl, still chained on the ground, watched with wide eyes. Her breath came fast. She had expected the human to fall quickly, to be cut down like so many others. But he stood strong, moving with courage, refusing to give in. Her heart thumped with every strike he made, every close call that nearly ended him. The master roared in fury. He struck again and again, forcing the human back. The whip he had dropped earlier was now in his hand once more, snapping through the air like lightning. The human's skin burned where the whip struck, but still he held his ground. Blood ran from his arm, his back, but his eyes never lost their fire. The crowd began to change. Some whispered in awe. Others began to cheer for the fight instead of the master. For the first time, the master did not look untouchable. The human had shown he could bleed, he could stumble, and that made the people restless. With a sudden burst of strength, the human caught the whip again, wrapping it around his arm despite the pain. He pulled hard, yanking the master forward. Then, with his other fist, he struck the alien in the face. The master fell to the ground, dazed, the crowd gasping in shock. The human stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds, but his stance firm. The girl's eyes filled with tears she did not understand. She had seen countless fights before, countless slaves punished until death, but never had anyone fought for her. Never had anyone faced the master and lived this long. Something inside her, something she had buried under pain and chains, stirred again. But the danger was not over. Guards rushed in from the sides, weapons drawn, ready to cut the human down. The master, groaning on the ground, shouted orders. "Kill him! Kill the human!" The human's heart pounded, but he knew he could not win against all of them. He had to act fast. He turned toward the girl, her chains glinting in the sunlight. Without hesitation, he ran to her side. The guards moved closer, but he swung the whip he had taken, keeping them back for a moment. "Hold still," he whispered as he pulled at her chains. The locks were old, rusted, and with enough force, he snapped one open. She gasped as her arm came free for the first time in days. He broke the second lock, and suddenly she was no longer chained. The girl stared at him in shock, her body weak but her spirit rising. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She tried to protest, whispering, "No, leave me. They'll kill you." But he only shook his head, his grip firm. "I'm not leaving you here," he said, his voice steady even as danger closed in. With her in his arms, he ran, pushing through the crowd. People stumbled aside, too shocked to stop him. Guards chased from behind, their boots pounding against the ground, their shouts echoing. The human's breath came heavy, his wounds burning, but he kept moving. Every step felt like it carried both their lives. The girl clung to him, too weak to walk on her own, her head resting against his chest. For the first time, she felt something strange: safety. His heartbeat was strong, steady, even as chaos erupted around them. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself believe he could take her away from the nightmare. Arrows flew through the air, striking into walls and dirt as the guards tried to stop them. The human ducked into narrow alleys, twisting through the maze of the city. The sound of pursuit never faded. They were close, too close. But he refused to stop. They reached a darker part of the city, broken ruins where no one lived anymore. The human slipped inside, finding cover behind a crumbling wall. He set her down gently, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. His hands shook from pain and exhaustion, but his eyes stayed sharp. The girl looked at him, her voice trembling. Why? Why risk everything? You don't even know me. The human met her gaze. His face was pale, blood still running from his wounds, but his voice was calm. Because no one should live like that. Not you. Not anyone. Her throat tightened. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever seen her as more than property, more than a slave. For the first time, hope flickered inside her, fragile but real. The human pressed his back against the wall, listening to the sound of guards searching nearby. Their footsteps echoed closer, dogs barking, orders shouted. The chase was not over. The girl tried to move, but her body was too weak. She leaned against the wall, watching him as he readied himself for what was to come. He looked tired, bleeding, but unbroken. Outside, the voices of soldiers grew louder. The human gritted his teeth, his hand tightening on a broken piece of wood he had picked up as a weapon. He knew they would find them soon. The girl whispered, her voice shaking, "They won't stop until they catch us." The human glanced at her, his eyes steady. "Then we don't stop either." Her chest tightened, torn between fear and something she could not name. He was just one man, one human against a city of enemies, yet he carried her as if the whole galaxy could not break him. She realized then that her fate had changed. She was no longer alone. Outside, the sound of boots drew nearer. The human's jaw set, his heart pounding. He knew the fight was far from over. The night ahead would test them both, but he was ready, because now it was not just his fight, it was theirs. The ruins were silent except for their breathing. The human leaned against the wall, sweat dripping from his forehead, his body still bleeding from the whip and the chase. The girl sat close to him, her back resting on the stones, her wrists red where the chains had been. For the first time in days, she was free from iron, but freedom still felt strange, almost unreal. He handed her a small piece of food from his pack, the last he had. She looked at it for a long time, her pride still fighting against her hunger, but then she took it and ate slowly. The human passed her his water flask, and she drank carefully, as if each sip was something precious. When she finished, her eyes lifted to him. "You should not have done this," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "You risked your life for me. You will die because of me." The human shook his head, wiping the blood from his arm. "I would have died inside if I had walked away." The girl looked down, silent for a moment. No one had ever said such words to her. People saw her as property, as a slave, as something to be owned. But this man spoke to her as if she mattered, as if her life was worth something more. A howl echoed in the distance, the sound of the master's hunting beasts. She froze, her eyes wide. "They are searching. They will find us." The human listened, his jaw tight. He could hear voices too, the shouts of guards moving closer. "Then we need to move," he said. He helped her stand, but her legs were weak, trembling after so many days without food or rest. She almost fell, but he caught her, steadying her with his strong hands. She leaned on him, embarrassed but too weak to refuse. "I cannot slow you down," she whispered. "Leave me here. Save yourself." He looked at her sharply, his eyes burning with something firm and unshakable. "I'm not leaving you. If they want you, they'll have to go through me." She stared at him, her chest tightening. No one had ever said such words to her before. Her own people had turned their faces away, too afraid to challenge the master. Yet this human, a stranger, had chosen to fight. She lowered her eyes, hiding the tears that threatened to come. They moved deeper into the ruins, the shadows wrapping around them like a shield. The girl leaned heavily on him, every step painful but filled with determination. She whispered quietly as they walked. "I rejected my master because he wanted to break me. He wanted me to crawl and beg, but I could not. I would rather die than lose my dignity." The human listened in silence. He did not interrupt, only let her speak, his arm steady around her shoulders. She continued, her voice trembling with both pride and pain. "I thought it would end with my death. I thought there was no one in the galaxy who would stand for me. Then you came." He glanced at her, his voice calm but firm. "You were right to reject him. No one should live as less than they are. Not you, not anyone." Her steps faltered, but his words gave her strength. She looked at him again, her eyes softer now, less guarded. The bond between them, fragile but growing, wrapped around her heart. For the first time, she did not feel alone in her fight. But the danger pressed closer. The sound of boots grew louder, torches flickering in the night as the guards searched the ruins. Dogs barked, their noses catching the scent of blood. The human pulled her behind a broken wall, covering her mouth gently as soldiers passed nearby. She pressed against him, her body trembling, her heart racing not only from fear, but from the closeness of the man who risked everything for her. When the soldiers moved away, the human released her, whispering, "We keep going. Stay quiet, trust me." Her lips parted as if to argue, but then she only nodded. Trust, something she had thought she could never give again, slipped quietly into her heart. They reached an abandoned shelter, half-roofed and hidden in the ruins. The human guided her inside, laying her down gently on a pile of old cloth he found. She was exhausted, her body ready to collapse. He covered her with his own jacket, ignoring his shivers. As she closed her eyes, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care, human? Why me?" He looked at her, his face calm despite his tiredness. "Because I saw your strength. They tried to break you, but you did not bend. You reminded me of what it means to be free, and I will not let them take that away." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. She turned her face away, but his words sank deep into her heart. She had been treated as nothing, as dirt, as property. Now, for the first time, someone saw her spirit and respected it. The night grew darker. Outside, the guards still searched, their shouts echoing in the distance. Inside the ruins, the girl drifted into sleep, her body finally resting. The human sat beside her, his eyes sharp, his body ready to move at any sound. He knew this was only the beginning. The master would not stop, not until she was dragged back in chains. But he also knew something else. He could not let her return to that life. Not now, not ever. The girl shifted in her sleep, her hand brushing against his arm as if seeking comfort. He looked down at her, his face softening. She was fragile now, but he had seen the fire in her. He knew she was not broken. And he swore silently to himself that as long as he breathed, she never would be. The sound of dogs barked again, closer this time. The human tightened his grip on the makeshift weapon he carried. The night was not over. The hunt was not finished. But for the first time, the girl did not face it alone. And for the first time, the human felt he had found something worth fighting for with his very life. The night ended too quickly. When the first light of morning touched the ruins, the sound of marching feet grew louder. The master had not given up. He returned with more guards, more weapons, and the cruel smile of someone who wanted revenge. The girl woke to the noise, her heart sinking. She knew what it meant. They had been found. The human was already standing at the doorway of the ruined shelter, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the figures approaching. He turned to her and spoke quietly. "They're here. Stay behind me." Her voice shook. "You cannot fight them all. There are too many." He gave her a quick look, firm but calm. "I don't care how many there are. I'm not giving you back." The words struck her like lightning. No one had ever said something like that before. Her throat tightened, but before she could speak, the master's voice thundered across the ruins. "Human!" the master shouted, his tone full of hatred and mockery. "You think you can steal what belongs to me? You think you can fight me and live? Bring her out now, and maybe I'll give you a quick death." The guards laughed cruelly, their weapons flashing in the morning light. The girl clutched the human's arm, whispering urgently, "Don't do this, please, they'll kill you." But the human only stepped forward into the open. The crowd of guards parted, and the master himself walked closer. His face was dark with rage, but also with pride. He wanted everyone to see his victory. He wanted to humiliate the human in front of all. The master pointed at the girl, who stood trembling behind the human. "She is mine. By law, by power, by right. Step aside, or I'll tear you apart." The human's voice rang out, steady and strong. "She is not yours. She belongs to no one, and I will not let you touch her again." Gasps spread through the crowd. Never had anyone spoken like that to the master. The air grew heavy, every alien waiting to see what would happen next. The master sneered, his eyes burning. "Then you challenge me," he said, his tone sharp. The human's fists tightened. "If that's what it takes, yes, I challenge you." A murmur ran through the guards. By their law, a challenge could not be ignored. It meant combat, it meant blood, and it meant that the winner's claim would be final. The master laughed, confident. "You think you can defeat me? You are nothing but a weak human. This will be over in seconds." The girl's heart pounded. She stepped forward, shaking her head. "No, please, don't. He'll kill you." But the human glanced back at her, his eyes soft for just a moment. "Trust me." The fight began. The master struck first, his blade slicing through the air with deadly force. The human dodged, the edge grazing his arm. Pain flared, but he did not stop. He countered with a punch, landing hard against the master's chest. The sound echoed, and the crowd gasped. The master roared and attacked again, his movements faster, stronger. The human blocked, dodged, fought with everything he had. Every strike rattled his bones, every dodge cost him strength, but he refused to fall. The girl watched with wide eyes, her hands gripping the stones until her knuckles turned white. Blood ran down the human's side, where the blade had cut, but he pushed forward. He struck the master's jaw, then his ribs, forcing him back step by step. The crowd began to stir. Some shouted for the master, others whispered in shock that the human still stood. The master grew more furious. He swung wildly, his pride breaking as the human refused to fall. Finally, he charged, slamming into the human and sending them both crashing to the ground. Dust flew as they wrestled, fists striking, bones aching. The girl cried out, her voice breaking. "No! Please, get up!" The human gritted his teeth, his body screaming in pain, but he used every ounce of strength left. He rolled, pinned the master down, and struck with all his force. Once, twice, until the master's weapon fell from his hand. The crowd went silent. The human stood over the master, chest heaving, blood dripping, but still strong. The master, bruised and beaten, glared up at him with hate and disbelief. "Kill me," the master hissed. "Do it, human. Take my life if you dare." The human raised his fist, but then he stopped. His voice rang out, low and steady. "I am not like you. I don't need to kill to win." He stepped back, leaving the master broken on the ground. The silence grew heavier. By their law, the fight was over. The human had won. The master had been defeated in front of everyone, and his claim was broken. The girl stared in shock, her lips trembling. She had believed the human would die, but instead, he stood victorious. The guards looked at each other, uncertain. The master could not give orders anymore. The challenge had been answered, the outcome clear. The human turned, his eyes meeting the girl's. For a moment, the world felt still. He walked to her slowly, every step heavy from exhaustion. When he reached her, he fell to one knee, lowering his head. Then he spoke, his voice soft but filled with meaning. "You are free now, not because you belong to me, but because no one owns you anymore." Her breath caught. Tears slid down her cheeks, tears she had held back for so long. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she touched his face gently. "You fought for me. No one has ever fought for me." He looked at her, his smile faint but real. "I would fight again." The crowd whispered louder, their voices filled with disbelief and awe. The master lay defeated, the human stood as the victor, and the girl was no longer a slave. But deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Freedom was dangerous, and enemies were everywhere. Yet she also knew one thing clearly. She was no longer alone. The human had given her more than freedom. He had given her hope. The crowd stood frozen in silence after the master's defeat. Dust still hung in the air, and the human's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Blood dripped from his wounds, yet his eyes remained sharp, unbroken. The alien girl sat close to him, her chains now lying broken on the ground. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then the whispers began. The guards looked at one another, their hands tightening on their weapons, but none stepped forward. The law was clear. The master had been challenged, and the master had lost. By their ancient rule, everything he owned now belonged to the victor. The girl's eyes widened as the truth sank in. By their law, she was no longer her master's slave. She now belonged to the human. The master groaned on the ground, blood on his lips, his pride shattered. He tried to rise, but the human stepped forward and placed a boot on his chest, holding him down. The human's voice was steady, loud enough for all to hear. I will not kill you, but your rule is over. You treated her like an animal, but no one here can deny what they saw today. She is free. The people gasped. Some were shocked, some afraid, others strangely moved. Never had they seen a human stand against one of their masters. Never had they seen someone fight not for power, not for greed, but for another's dignity. The girl's throat tightened, her heart racing. She had dreamed of freedom, but never believed it possible. Yet here she was, standing in the ruins of her chains, her spirit unbroken. She looked at the human, her eyes shining with something she had buried long ago, hope. The master spat in fury, shouting, "She belongs to you now! That is the law!" His voice cracked, full of bitterness. He thought his words would bind her to another cage, but the human only turned and looked at the girl. His face softened, his voice calm. No, no, she belongs to no one. Not to me, not to anyone. She is free to walk her own path. The crowd gasped louder, even more shocked than before. To refuse ownership was unheard of. By law, he had every right to keep her. Yet he chose to give her freedom instead. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She had been forced to kneel, forced to beg, forced to suffer. Now, someone had fought for her and given her back her life without asking anything in return. Her legs trembled as she stepped toward him. Slowly, carefully, she lowered herself to her knees, not as a slave, not as property, but out of respect. She whispered, her voice breaking, "You saved my soul. Now I belong to no one but myself." The human reached out, gently lifting her chin so she would look at him. "That's how it should be," he said softly. "You are stronger than they ever believed." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The crowd, the guards, even the broken master faded away. There was only the human and the girl, standing together in a world that wanted to crush them, but could not. Then the voices rose again. Some in the crowd began to cheer softly, uncertain at first, but growing louder. They had seen the cruelty of the master. They had seen the courage of the human, and a dangerous thought began to spread among them. If one man could stand against a master, maybe others could too. The master screamed in rage, but his voice was weak, drowned by the whispers of rebellion spreading through the people. The guards hesitated, no longer sure if they should obey him. Fear flickered in their eyes. The human turned back to the girl, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers trembling, and he helped her stand. For the first time, she stood tall without chains pulling her down. The morning sun touched her face, and she felt it as if for the first time in her life. They walked together through the crowd. No one stopped them. The people parted, their eyes filled with awe and respect. Some lowered their heads, not in fear, but in recognition. They had witnessed something impossible, a human breaking the power of a master. As they left the ruins behind, the girl glanced at him, her voice soft but filled with wonder. What will happen now? The human looked forward, his jaw set. Now we run, now we fight, and now we live free. Her lips trembled with a smile, small but real. She had lost everything, her family, her freedom, her dignity. But in that moment, she realized she had gained something greater. She had gained hope, and hope was more powerful than chains. The day grew brighter as they moved away from the city. Behind them, the whispers of the people grew stronger. Ahead of them, danger waited, but also the chance of a new life. The girl walked beside the human, her steps still weak, but her spirit stronger than ever. She knew the road would not be easy. The master's allies would hunt them. The laws of the land would not forgive them. Yet she also knew one truth that burned in her heart. She was no longer alone. The human glanced at her, his eyes steady. Whatever comes, we face it together. She nodded, her chest tight with emotions she could not yet name. For the first time, she felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The chains were gone, the fear was broken, and in its place was something she thought she would never have again: freedom. As the sun rose higher, the two figures walked into the unknown. One was a human who refused to bow, the other a girl who had once been treated like an animal, but now stood as herself again. Together, they carried more than survival. They carried a story that would spread like fire, a story that no whip or master could ever silence. And though the girl had said she belonged to no one, deep inside she knew something else too. Her heart had already chosen to walk beside the human who had given her back her life.